All right, let's get right into it. On October 7th, 2022, the United States basically dropped a bomb on the tech world. They unleashed a strategy designed to do one very specific thing: stop China's technological rise dead in its tracks. And they went for the jugular, targeting the single most critical resource of the 21st century, the advanced semiconductor. This is way more than a trade dispute. It's a battle for who writes the rules for the future. And you really can't overstate the stakes here. As analyst Gregory Allen from CSIS put it, that one decision marked the beginning of a new era. It was the moment that a long-simmering tech rivalry went from a Cold War to a very, very hot one. So what is this chip war we keep hearing about? Well, it's easily one of the most complicated and high-stakes geopolitical stories playing out right now. Think of it as a technological siege, but with global consequences. And that's exactly what we're going to break down here. So our story really begins with what people are now calling the October shock, a set of rules that were just quietly released on a Friday afternoon that completely flipped the script on how technology competition works. You see, for decades, the U.S. policy was pretty simple: just stay a few steps ahead of everyone else. It was a strategy called relative advantage. But that's all out the window now. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan came out and announced a brand new doctrine. The goal is to maintain as large a lead as possible. This is a huge deal. It's not about just running faster anymore. It's about actively trying to slow your competitor down. A truly radical shift in policy. And this whole new doctrine, it was cooked up by a very small, very focused group of people. You have Jake Sullivan setting the grand strategy, Turin Chabra as the guy on the ground architecting how to hit the choke points, and Alan Estevez in charge of making it all happen. These are the people who decided to take the existing rulebook and stretch it further than anyone thought possible. But, how does a strategy like this actually work? How do you strangle an entire nation's tech industry? Well, it's built on a few key pillars that, when put together, create a really powerful technological blockade. It really boils down to three core components. First, they set these super strict hardware thresholds that spell out exactly which chips and which chip-making tools are off-limits. Second, they unleashed a legal superweapon called the Foreign Direct Product Rule. And third, maybe the most dramatic of all, the U.S. Persons Rule. Now, the real killer move here is that Foreign Direct Product Rule, or FDPR. It's a bit complex, but it basically says that because the entire global chip supply chain relies so heavily on American software and equipment, the U.S. gets to say what happens in factories in Taiwan, in South Korea, anywhere. It literally weaponizes the very idea of a globalized supply chain. And then you have the U.S. Persons Rule, which had this just incredible, immediate human impact. Overnight, 43 senior American executives, plus hundreds of engineers working in China's chip industry, got a call. And they were given an impossible choice: quit your high-paying job right now, or you risk losing your American citizenship. And the effect was just devastating. As one analyst said, the rule was so brutally effective, it was like paralyzing Chinese manufacturing overnight. This wasn't just about cutting off a supply of chips. It was a surgical strike designed to decapitate the management and the technical know-how of these Chinese companies. Now, a move this big, this aggressive, was obviously going to send shockwaves around the world. And it did. It created chaos in the stock markets, it forced some really intense, high-stakes diplomacy, and it led to this really strange paradox. The market reaction was pure panic. NVIDIA's stock just cratered. A major equipment maker, Lam Research, warned it could lose $2.5 billion in revenue, and Apple had to suddenly drop a rising Chinese memory chip supplier called YMTC, which was a crippling blow to that company. But the U.S. knew it couldn't do this alone. I mean, the blockade would be useless if China could just go buy similar tools from, say, the Netherlands or Japan. So they launched this massive diplomatic effort, which led to a trilateral agreement in January 2023. A few months later, the Dutch and the Japanese put their own similar restrictions in place. The wall was being built. But this is where things get weird. You'd think after these controls were announced, sales of chip-making gear to China would plummet, right? Nope, they skyrocketed. Chinese companies went on an absolutely frantic, multi-billion-dollar shopping spree, just stockpiling every single piece of equipment they could get their hands on before the Allied rules fully kicked in. And that mad dash to stockpile everything, it shows you something really important. China was already preparing for this. They saw it as an act of technology hegemony, and they were ready to launch a massive counteroffensive to survive and to fight back. So The world pretty much assumed China's chip industry was frozen, right? Locked in at its 2022 technology level. Then, in August of 2023, less than a year after the controls hit, Huawei quietly dropped a new smartphone, and what was inside of it sent shockwaves through Washington. That phone was powered by a 7-nanometer processor. That's a level of technology the US was certain it had blocked China from reaching. It was made by China's top chip foundry, a company called SMIC, and they did it using older equipment that they cleverly pushed to its absolute limits. It was, without a doubt, a legitimate technological breakthrough. And for Beijing, it was a massive propaganda victory. Okay, but let's put this breakthrough into perspective, because it's not the whole story. While it was impressive, it came with some major limitations. For one, SMIC's manufacturing process is incredibly inefficient. They get very few good chips from each wafer compared to the industry leader, TSMC. And two, even their best AI chip today only has about 60% of the performance of NVIDIA's top-of-the-line H100. So yes, they're advancing, but they are still way behind the cutting edge. And to try and close that gap, China is doing what it does best, unleashing an absolute torrent of cash. This is the size of its third national semiconductor investment fund, what they call the Big Fund, a mind-boggling $47.5 billion, all aimed at one thing: building a self-sufficient domestic chip industry from scratch. And all of this has kicked off this relentless cycle of escalation. The US imposes rules in 2022. China finds a loophole, so the US tightens the screws in 2023. China tries a new workaround, so the US expands the rules again. It's become a permanent cat-and-mouse game, a technological war where every move is met with a countermove. So where does all this leave us? Well, a lot of analysts are now talking about the rise of a new silicon curtain, a new kind of iron curtain that's dividing the world into two separate, competing, and totally incompatible tech ecosystems. If you ask people inside the industry, they're pretty skeptical. The CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, and his company is right in the middle of this whole storm. He basically called the policy a failure. His argument is that all this does is force China to double down and accelerate building its own domestic champions. Strategic analysts like Gregory Allen, who we heard from earlier, they have a more nuanced view. They say, look, the controls are working. They are slowing China down, they are disrupting their plans, they're imposing real costs and delays, but they can't stop them completely. So the big takeaway seems to be that while the policy has definitely inflicted a lot of damage, that goal of total strangulation, that's proven to be a lot harder to achieve. And that really leaves us with the central question for the next decade of technology and geopolitics. The silicon curtain has been raised. The tech world is being split in two. But as China pours billions into its own ecosystem and keeps proving it can innovate even under extreme pressure, the real question is that curtain actually strong enough to hold?